Well, the month we used to call June has rolled back around again, so it's time for the return of your favorite segment, the Pride Month Roundup. And yes, if you feel like the last Pride Month only ended like 5 minutes ago, if it feels sometimes like the entire world is just a permanent Pride Month doom loop, believe me, you are not alone. And moreover, if you feel like they should just get it over with and change the name to Child Sex Predator Appreciation Month, since this stuff so often seems to redound with ever greater frequency to grown adults talking to little kids about weird sex stuff, well, you're not alone in that either. I've been sort of curious about how Pride Month was going to play out this year, since last year I think we saw the first ever evidence of corporate America, certain quarters of it at least, pulling back ever so slightly from the maniacal embrace of all things sexually non-normative, which stands to reason since last year's Pride Month took place in the immediate aftermath of the Bud Light debacle, which was really the first time a major American brand was made to pay a price for their promoting of sex perverts and sex perversion. And Target paid a heavy price last year too, after they debuted their Pride Month collection and people noticed that it included swimwear for little boys to tuck their genitals back and pretend to be little girls. Yeah. No idea why parents got upset about that one. It's a real mystery. Better convene a focus group so we can get to the bottom of it. So it would appear, from my non-scientific perspective at least, that the amount of ridiculous, absurd Pride Month fanfare around the start of June might be starting to abate somewhat, at least compared to what it was like for several years before there, where every company and every industry and every institution had to turn their website and their social media profiles into big walls of rainbow skittle vomit, and if you didn't do it by the start of business on the 1st of June, the woke rage mob would come after your ass for being a bigoted, homophobic bastard. But some of these companies and institutions, you don't need me to tell you, they are going to go down with the woke rainbow-colored ship, which includes, regrettably, apparently, the U.S. Armed Forces. The Navy Special Warfare Command rainbowized its logo on its Facebook page the other day and went even farther than that by further defacing the logo with the woke buzzwords dignity, service, respect, equality, and of course, obligatorily, pride. And it didn't really go all that well. They had to turn off the comments pretty quickly after the public reaction, especially from people who used to serve in that particular command, was universally and vehemently negative. Here's a brief selection. Quote, "This is a slap in the face to every special warfare operator that has put their lives on the line for the nation. Quote, man, this woke shit is like a cancer and needs to be handled and dealt with as a threat to national security. Quote, so glad I got out before this bullshit took over." So yeah, no idea why you guys are falling so woefully short of your recruiting targets. That one is a real head scratcher. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we celebrate June as Toxic Masculinity Appreciation Month. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And in the grand pantheon of ill-conceived 1970s baseball promotions that descended into chaos and anarchy and stopped just short of mass murder, there are two of them that most immediately come to mind, for this reporter at least. And I guess it's interesting to note that they both came out of the American League Central, or the American League East, as it was then. The Chicago White Sox famously gave us Disco Demolition Night in July of 1979, but 5 years before that, 50 years ago this very day, as a matter of fact, Tuesday the 4th of June 1974, a mere 19 days before the birth of Mr. Curmudgeon's little boy, the Cleveland Indians, shit, have I just committed a racist hate crime? Kicked off the trend with the famous, some might say infamous, but I guess infamy is a relative term when you're a city whose river once caught fire. Not the very first, and amazingly, not the very last, 10-cent beer night. The Tribe were hosting the Texas Rangers that evening. Their record stood at 24-25 on the season, good for third place in the division, 3 games back of the first place Boston Red Sox. But the Fighting Braves of the Cuyahoga were having a hell of a problem with midweek attendance back in those years. You might say there was an overabundance of empty mats in the TP. So just like General Phil Sheridan before him, Indians owner Nick Maletti concluded that the best way to liven up an Indians party is with a whole shitload of cheap alcohol. Now, it may surprise you to learn that this was not the first ever 10-cent beer night in Cleveland. They'd been doing it a couple times a year since all the way back in 1971, long enough ago that it actually originated as nickel beer night. And damn that Nix inflation, am I right? And there hadn't been any public disorder associated with the promotion previously. More often than not, it didn't even create that much of an attendance bump. But on this particular night, this matchup between the visiting Rangers and the homestanding Erie Warriors, it had a bit of history behind it. A spot of bad blood, if you prefer. And it was recent history and very fresh bad blood, for just a week previously down in Arlington, the Rangers and the Sons of Geronimo had themselves a good, proper, old-fashioned baseball Donnybrook, and I have got the video to prove it, which we will get to in just a moment, right after we set the scene. The trouble begins in the bottom of the fourth, when Rangers second baseman Lenny Randle breaks up a double play with a slide that the Indians thought might have been a dirty play. So, since this was the way you handled such things back in these days, the Indians hit the first Rangers batter that came to the plate in the bottom of the fourth. Then the Rangers retaliated by hitting one of their guys. Long story short, there's a total of 4 hit batsmen between the controversial play in the fourth and the next time Lenny Randle comes up to bat, leading off the eighth. Now, Lenny Randle didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday, so he knows they are going to be throwing at him here. And sure enough, the first pitch from Milt Wilcox goes behind his legs. So if he didn't know the score before, he knows it now. And you've got one of two options here if you're Lenny Randle. You can either stand there and wait to be drilled, or you can invent a non-standard solution to the problem and try to flip the script on the bastards. And what follows is probably the most brilliantly inventive act of mound charging in all of baseball history, as far as this reporter is concerned. And spoiler alert, if you have never seen a batter fight 3 guys in the act of running to first base, you don't want to miss this video. Roll the tape, Jim Eagle. Okay, first pitch goes behind him. Let's pause it here. So now Lenny Randle says, you know what? Instead of just standing here and letting this cracker nail me, how about if I step out of the way, bunt the ball down the first baseline, and then I will level his bitch ass when he comes and tries to field the ball. Pause it here again. Now, here's the point at which Wilcox displays a troubling lack of situational awareness, because the prudent thing to do if you're him is to just field the ball and throw it to first. Because if you try to tag him out, you're doing the exact thing he was hoping you were going to do, as evidenced here by the fact that Randle actually leaves the base path to give himself a better angle for the pancake shoulder tackle he is about to lay on this poor dumb bastard. And down goes Wilcox, helicoptering to the ground like a manhole cover drop from 30,000 feet. Now, Lenny Randle may be a man who is spoiling for a fight, but he is no barbarian, damn it. He hasn't forgotten about the rules of the game, so after he concludes his business with Mr. Wilcox, he immediately returns to the base path to complete the task of running to first, even though he has already been tagged out. So maybe he's just looking for more dudes to fight. In fact, yeah, I think it's probably that second thing. You know, I don't think he ever made it to first base. But that man sure got his money's worth, didn't he? If it was me, I would put that shit on my tombstone. He once fought a pitcher and the first and second baseman in the act of grounding out. Also, my favorite thing about this incident, nobody got thrown out of the game. No fines, no suspensions, not a damn thing. It was a simpler time, what can I say? Now, in most retellings of the story of 10-cent beer night, you don't get any of this background. They don't tell you these teams had just had a big kerfuffle with each other the last time they played a week previously. They also don't tell you that Billy Martin, who was managing the Rangers at the time, a man who never met a bad situation he didn't try to make worse, when they asked him after the game if he was concerned about any retaliation taking place next week in Cleveland, he said, nah, they won't have enough fans there to worry about. The Clevelanders didn't like that very much, as you would expect they mightn't. They took it rather as sort of a throwing down of the gauntlet. So this was a witch's brew with at least 3 ingredients by this point. You had 2 teams that just fought and probably wanted to fight each other again. You had the opposing manager talking shit about the home fans, and you had 10-cent beer night as the next game on the schedule. They were expecting around 12,000, 13,000 fans to turn up on the night in question, which would have been consistent with what they got on the previous cheap beer promotion nights. And yes, that's how bad the attendance was in Cleveland in the mid-70s. You had to offer unlimited 10-cent beer to even get a 5-figure crowd through the gate on a Tuesday night, which is pretty damned amazing. And in the event, they got about 25,000, and the negative security implications here are pretty obvious because they wound up half-staffed for the number of people who were actually present, which contributed to the descent of the evening into utter chaos and anarchy. As for the beer, it was Stroh's 3%, which I think you'd have to pay me 10 cents to drink that stuff. Your dime got you a 12-ounce cup, and there was a limit of 6 per customer per purchase. So in other words, as a practical matter, there was no limit, except the number of beers you can physically carry back to your seat on each trip. And these were also the days when it hadn't yet occurred to anybody that it might be prudent to shut off alcohol sales after the 7th inning, which goes a long way toward explaining why all hell broke loose around the top of the 8th. And though they didn't have enough police or security on hand, they did have plenty of beer, so you gotta give them that. In fact, when the lines at the concession stands got so backed up that it threatened to block the concourses and create a fire hazard, they opened up the area behind the outfield fence, backed up a couple of beer trucks so people could go and fill their cups right from the fire hose. But for the first 4 innings or so, it looked like the evening's events might conclude without any mass acts of unpleasantness. A couple of comely young women ran onto the field and displayed their breasts, which nobody minded all that much. Then there were a couple of naked dudes, which went over slightly less well, as you might expect. But things started turning ugly as the Rangers built a 5-1 lead in the middle innings. By the 7th inning stretch, families with children, players' wives, and everyone else for whom discretion was the better part of valor could see that a bad situation was potentially developing, and they began filing out of the ballpark as quickly as possible. So then you've got basically nobody left in the place who isn't drunk off their ass. This also might be the only game in Major League history where the sports writers and the TV broadcasters all remarked on the fact that the haze of marijuana and firecracker smoke was interfering with the ability of the outfielders to track fly balls. So it goes without saying that if the outfielders are having trouble seeing the ball, then it's also difficult for people in the dugout to clearly see what is happening in the outfield, which is going to come into play here in just a moment. The situation kept deteriorating as the 7th inning gave way to the 8th. Fans kept running onto the field. Some kids thought it would be fun to start chucking lit firecrackers into the Rangers bullpen, and their first baseman, Mike Hargrove, who ironically was a future Indians manager, nearly got struck in the head with an empty gallon jug of Thunderbird. Yes, you heard that right. Someone brought a gallon jug of Thunderbird to 10-cent beer night, and apparently drank the whole damn thing, and was still lucid enough afterward to hurl the empty jug at an opposing player and almost hit him. So that dude wins the gold medal for high-functioning alcoholism, as far as I am concerned. That's a high-class night of drinking, ain't it? You got your Stroh's 3% in one hand and your jug of Thunderbird in the other. It's like the 1970s Cleveland version of champagne and caviar. Now, all things considered, it probably would have been the best thing for everybody if the score had just remained not close and the Rangers would have won comfortably by 3 or 4 runs. If it had gone that way, perhaps we would not be sitting here marking the 50th anniversary of one of the most notorious sports riots in world history. But that's not the way it went. In the event, the Indians did the worst possible thing they could have done by rallying in the bottom of the 9th to tie the game 5-5. The 20,000 blind drunk hooligans who remained in the stands at this point were now very happy indeed, and they manifested that happiness by increasing the volume of firecrackers and batteries they were throwing at the Rangers defenders. Jeff Burroughs was playing right field that night, and this was the point at which a 19-year-old idiot named Terry Yurkich thought it would be fun to run out there and steal his hat, which he duly attempted to do. Burroughs took exception to an idiot trying to steal his hat, and in the act of trying to reclaim the item from the would-be thief, he slips and falls down. And do you remember the situation with the smoke and the diminished visibility? Well, Billy Martin looks up, through the haze from the dugout, and all he can see is Jeff Burrows falling down like a wounded deer. So Martin concludes that his right fielder has just been fucking shot by somebody in the stands. And here's where this random, meaningless game between two bad clubs in 1974 suddenly turns into the Battle of Stirling Bridge from the third act of Braveheart. Billy Martin says, "I am the general here. We've got a wounded soldier on the field, so damn it, men, you pick up any weapons and armor you can find, and we are going to go out there and save our comrade from the enemy." And what followed was probably the closest thing to an infantry charge that has ever been witnessed on a major league field. The Rangers emerge en masse from the third base dugout, some wielding bats, some wielding fungos, some clad in random bits of catcher's equipment. And in the finest tradition of the ancient Greek phalanx, they smashed their way through a wall of drunken Clevelanders and finally reached their fallen colleague, who duly informs them that he has not, in fact, been shot. He was just trying to get his hat back from the idiot that stole it. And there was much rejoicing. But only for a brief moment, because now the 25 Texas Rangers realize they are completely surrounded by drunken Indians fans and outnumbered at least 10-1. Meanwhile, over in the Cleveland dugout, they've spent these past few minutes sort of hoping against hope that order is restored at some point so they can get back to their potentially game-winning rally. But then the Billy Martin infantry charge happens, and suddenly the Indians realize, shit, the opposing ball club is about to be lynched by our drunk fans. And so Indians manager Ken Aspromonte gives his dugout the same order Billy Martin had just given his dugout. Grab some weapons, boys. We got to go out there and save the Rangers. And then we get our second infantry charge of the evening as the Indians, despite the fact that these teams hate each other, feel honor-bound to help their opponents leave their ballpark in a condition of not being dead. So the Indians fight their way over to right field where the Rangers are making their Custer-like last stand at the Battle of Little Beerhorn. Then the two clubs combine their martial efforts and manage to battle their way off the field and into the clubhouse. And when I say battle, that is no overstatement, because they were facing an armed enemy force at this point. People are wielding chains, knives, brass knuckles, broken bottles, all manner of things, really. Some people, believe it or not, have even dismantled their stadium seats and are walking around beating people with the broken off metal armrests, which is a pretty outstanding show of ingenuity, but these energies probably should be channeled in a bit of a more productive direction, is all I'm saying. After the two teams had succeeded in making it off the field alive and decamping to the clubhouse, where they quickly locked and barred the doors and posted players with bats as armed guards, the rioting on the field continued for nearly half an hour. The bases were stolen, the dugouts were ransacked and looted, and thrown items later recovered from the field included rocks, bottles, batteries, hot dogs, folding chairs, basically everything a drunk person can throw. The outmanned security guards eventually just threw up their hands and gave up all attempts at restoring order. And the orgy of drunken violence continued until the Cleveland police decided to show up in force, better late than never, I guess, and start cracking skulls and arresting people. The home plate umpire and crew chief, the Hall of Famer Nestor Chilak, having received various cuts and bruises himself during the course of the riot, decided there wasn't really a chance in hell he was attempting to resume this game, so he declares a forfeit in favor of the Rangers. And we will never know how that ninth inning rally might have turned out. And did you know that all baseball forfeits are entered into the record book as having a score of 9-0, except sometimes they're not? It's 9-0 if you didn't play any game at all. If it's a game that got forfeited in progress, then you add a run for every inning of baseball that wasn't played. And if the team getting the forfeit still doesn't have enough runs, then you just add enough runs until they... So this is a rare case where the Rangers are recorded as having won the game with a 5-5 score. Now, they had... Would you believe they actually had another 10-cent beer night less than a month later in July? Like I said, it was a simpler time. But they did impose a 2 beer per customer maximum thereafter, so maybe lessons were learned after all. And if you want to know my opinion, I think there is nothing about the story of 10-cent beer night that is anywhere remotely as badass as Lenny Randle fighting 3 dudes on his way to first base. How I have never seen that video before today, I do not have the faintest idea. But needless to say, I want to inject that video directly into my veins. I want to project that video on the inside of my eyeballs so I can watch it while I sleep. I always thought of Lenny Randle as sort of a mediocre journeyman middle infielder. Now I find out he's one of the baddest motherfuckers that ever lived, and who knew? That's it for me. God bless the memory of the Cleveland Indians and Chief Wahoo. May they live forever in the hearts of their countrymen. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.